Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I bring to you yet another exciting episode 66 with esteemed lawyer and mediator Angela Reddock-Wright. As those of you who follow us, you know that my goal is always to bring thought leaders from around the world to shed light, to share insight into what goes on in the minds of people in conflict. And in that regard, Angela is highly regarded across the state of California and beyond as being a leading neutral mediator in employment and labor-related matters and Title IX sexual assault, hazing, and bullying cases. She was a licensed attorney for nearly 30 years and continues to be licensed, yet sought to make a difference differently by becoming a mediator. And in that regard, as I've already said, she's highly sought after and well regarded in the circles of mediation, litigation, and with her specialty employment law. Now, Angela brings to us a very interesting history. I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that as we get started. And you know, what I've seen of Angela over the last, I think it's 5 or 10 years, first meeting her through our mutual association, the Southern California Mediation Association. She attended her first SCMA conference in downtown Los Angeles. And she had such a beaming smile, I had to go up to her and say, welcome. I wasn't there officially on behalf of SCMA, but I was active with the organization. And I just felt that this was an exciting person to get to know. And, you know, she was just so delightful and we stayed in contact. And what I was so impressed with about Angela is not only what she has contributed to the mediation world, and particularly in the greater Los Angeles area where she actively practices, but she also went on to serve very quickly on the SCMA board and later becoming its president. So I was very happy to work under her leadership and stay in active collaboration with her. She's dynamic, she's wonderful, she hosts her own radio show, she's written a book, and just brings so much to understanding the world of conflict and where people need to go. So this is your opportunity. You've got a few minutes before we get started in the official interview. So go tell your friends, invite your colleagues, and come join us for the next 30 to 40 minutes. What Angela has to say about today's workplace and the challenges employers face. So again, Dr. Debra Dupree, Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, host and founder of DCM, changing the way we think about conflict from adversity to opportunity. Today, I'm so excited to have a colleague and I consider a longtime friend from our association with the Southern California Mediation Association. And today I have Angela Reddock-Wright. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you.
Well, thank you. I know we've talked about this for a long time. You are one busy professional, and I'm glad to see that because it's exciting to have people like you who are out there doing good work in our workplaces of today. And so, Angela, one of the things that I always find fascinating for myself, but I also find my listeners and viewers find fascinating to hear the story of how did you get into law? How did you get into this field of law? And so I'd like to have you share a little bit about that before we jump into our topic today of litigation no more.
Right. Well, thank you again so much for having me, and back at you for being busy and out there on the front lines helping to advocate for the work that we do around mediation and conflict resolution. I just really admire you and all that you're doing. So just in terms of how I became an attorney, it's somewhat fluid. And if I when I think back on it, I trace it back to my early days growing up as a child in Birmingham, Alabama, which is where my family is from. And my grandmother on my maternal side, Fleta Gills, may she rest in peace. She was a convalescent healthcare worker, and she was involved in a union at the convalescent home where she worked. And I remember, I didn't quite understand it then, but I remember at the time that she and her coworkers would join together in striking and advocating for better wages and opportunities for them in their workplace. And I remember actually being out on the strike line or the picket line with her. And I moved to California when I was 9. So I want to say I had to be about 5 or 6 years old at the
Wow.
time. And so that early memory, I think, kind of placed in me a sense of, advocacy and wanting to be someone who was an advocate and who fought for things that mattered. And so I have a feeling that carried with me through the rest of my life and career. And in college, I had a chance to intern one summer with someone who was a lawyer. And so I think the combination of that early experience with my grandmother, then interning in a law firm while in college, and really seeing what it meant to be a lawyer, that kind of resonated with me. And I knew, having been an English and political science major and not very good at math and sciences, I'm like, what can I do? Oh, I think I'll be a lawyer. And so that's how I became a lawyer. And my first experience as a lawyer was with an employment and labor law firm. And haven't looked back since. I've practiced employment and labor law for almost 30 years now. And now a mediator, helping employers and employees to resolve conflict through, mediated solutions, whether it be litigated cases or pre-litigated cases.
Well, wonderful. Because I knew a little bit about your history, having had you on another interview series a couple of years ago. And so, wow, talk about an early start at the age of 5 or 6.
Yes.
And what a powerful opportunity also to see firsthand the differences, the impact that those kinds of actions can have on the lives of people and in the communities where you live.
Right, exactly.
And so, again, I've seen your career not so much as when you were actively litigating, but I remember meeting you. I think it was at your first SCMA conference, probably, I don't know, 10 years or so ago. And
Yes.
boy, did you flourish as a mediator there, and actually became president of SCMA. And so proud of the initiative you took and the leadership that you demonstrated, and your legacy lives on, Angela, a living
Thank
legacy.
you.
Yeah, yeah. One of my curiosities in having you on this particular show is because of my own interest in workplace fairness, the workplace justice. Having been a mediator myself for over 30 years in the workplace, but also as a psychologist, I've
Mhm.
seen firsthand, the trauma, the decimation that people have experienced, going through adverse workplace situations. And that's been my goal in terms of helping employers and employees take a different look at how to intervene early
Right.
to avoid those devastating effects. And so when we talk about the application of mediation to some of the workplace issues, I guess, let's start with your now eye towards resolution and mediation. What types of cases do you actually mediate?
Right. So, as I mentioned, I've been practicing for almost 30 years. And for the majority of my career, I was an employment litigator. So, representing clients on both sides of the aisle, both employers and employees, in cases such as wrongful termination, harassment, discrimination, wage and hour violations, or alleged wage and hour violations. And so, what I've done now, or what my work looks like now, is I've moved from the advocate role to the mediator or the neutral role. And so I normally become involved, I mediate cases daily between employers and employees, and I'm usually retained by their attorneys. They mutually agree and recommend me to their client. And they either hire me pre-litigation before a lawsuit is filed, but the employer's on notice of a potential lawsuit, either if a plaintiff is representing him or herself, or they're represented by counsel, or I'm retained in the midst of a lawsuit, sometimes early in the lawsuit, just in the discovery stages, or sometimes later after something like a summary judgment motion has been filed, or they're right on the eve of trial and they want to try one more opportunity before having that case heard by a jury to have the case resolved. So my day-to-day looks like I'm on Zoom or in a conference room in a local, business area. I'm on a panel with a company called Signature Resolution. And so my days look like on Zoom or in a conference room with parties in separate rooms, and my working to try to help them get to a resolution and through a mediated settlement. But
Wow.
specifically focused primarily on employment matters like wrongful termination, harassment, discrimination, wage and hour claims. I also have a specialty in Title IX cases, and those Title IX cases generally involve schools, colleges, or universities, and the same principles apply of that we see with our anti-discrimination and harassment statutes, but Title IX specifically applies those principles in the school context. And I do sexual abuse and bullying and hazing claims in that context as well.
Well, it's interesting. It's still alive and well, isn't it? Those
Yes,
kind of
yes.
terms, go back hundreds of years, but we still see it happening, and it's
You
pretty
know what
frightening.
you're the psychologist, and I attribute that to human nature, right? I'm like, how is it that I remember when I first started out as a young associate, at that time, we started to see kind of an increase, and I'm sure you were on the front lines of doing this work of workplace trainings and consultants and experts like yourself going into workplaces and training on preventing harassment, discrimination, having great workplaces, and jump ahead to almost 30 years later. I'm like, we're still grappling with these issues. What's the answer? Training is great, but ultimately it doesn't override our human nature. And unfortunately, our bad nature takes precedent, sometimes supersedes our good nature. And so it means that folks like you, like the two of us and our colleagues are still in business because there's still a need for those of us who are on the ground trying to help create better workplaces.
Well, that's an interesting point then, is that, I guess as long as the bad behavior persists, then people like you and me and our fellow colleagues are needed. And so
Right.
I hope to make a change, but, then again, I guess we can't touch everybody's lives, but we can
Yeah.
certainly try, right?
And I think we are one person at a time, one environment at a time. So,
Yeah. Well, I know I really enjoy influencing minds early. And there was a stat by Ken Blanchard's institute, the Blanchard Institute. And you know that, or recall, Ken Blanchard rose to his fame, particularly for the 1 Minute Manager book that he
mhm.
wrote that really took hold. And now I believe the institute is run by his son. But one of the stats that they came up with was that in the workplace, newly hired supervisors it can actually be as much as 10 to 15 years before they truly receive the kind of training necessary to manage on the people side of things. I found
Mhm.
that very startling because, many people get promoted because of how good they are in their craft, whatever that might be, but it
Right.
doesn't necessarily mean they know how to manage people. And that's where I've seen over my 20 years of being a senior mediator at the Department of Navy is that oftentimes the mistakes came from those newer supervisors who just didn't know how to handle or manage or respond to their employee concerns and issues.
Right. That is so true. I host a radio show which turns into a podcast as well called Legal Lens with Angela. And I literally before this podcast, I just interviewed a HR strategic leader, thought leader. Her name is Natasha Bauman. And she just wrote a book called Crazy AF. And AF does not mean what we think it is, but it's all about empowering people in terms of their mental health at work. And she said the exact same thing from her years of being in the C-suite as a corporate executive, that one of the things that she really tried to influence was how do we onboard new managers and supervisors, and make sure they're equipped, to manage those that they are now overseeing. But I think a lot of where the pitfalls that we see in the workplace are for that very reason, because we have now empowered people without giving them the tools and the training that they need to be successful in managing.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And in that regard, then, you mentioned school districts, Angela, and universities and so forth. What are some of the other clients that you represent?
That I work with in mediation, it's the full gamut. I mean, it's all employers for the most part. I've seen them all in terms of, retail, customer service industry, transportation industry, um, thinking of, the tech industry. That's big now. I see a lot of cases involving tech industries around the country. So it's really the full gamut. You have employees will work. Angela will serve as your mediator, from small employers to large employers alike. But in my career and now as a mediator, I've really seen the full gamut of workplaces represented.
So what I'm hearing then is, for our employers out there, don't feel that you're alone, because you've got plenty of company, whatever your industry might be, right?
Yes, yes, the principles go across the board. Again, it kind of goes to you know, this concept of we're all humans. We all, make similar mistakes, when we're managing and when we're running workplaces. And so it really doesn't matter the workplace. I mean, some are unique. They have, issues that are more unique, like a logistics company, for example. You may be dealing with the employees who are kind of on the front lines engaged in physical labor. And so what kind of oversight and management do you provide in those environments versus in a tech environment? You're dealing with employees who are creating and making software and apps, and, helping think about the next generation of technology, such as artificial intelligence. But the principles and in who we are at our core as people kind of transcends work environments.
Oh, that's for sure. I just watched the Steve Jobs, um, uh, I'm not even sure what you call it, not a documentary, but the
Mhm.
story about his life, and I found that very interesting, because he certainly was one of those very creative individuals. But as a
Yes.
leader, an interface with people, nope, that's why he got fired. And so
Yes, yes. I saw that same documentary. Intriguing. And we see it. I think I've seen a similar documentary on the history of Uber.
Mm.
Pretty much all the tech giants, have something out there about their stories. And it is intriguing to see how brilliant they are in terms of, helping change and impact our society with the technology they envision and create, and empower others to create, but the people skills aren't always there.
Yes, it's interesting how we think we're communicating when oftentimes we're simply talking at each other, telling our ideas rather than actually exchanging and paying attention to where other people are coming from.
Right.
Angela, I have a question for you, because I know from my years of mediation and sort of the level of supervision or management that I saw oftentimes in play. And Navy had an interesting model. The whomever the direct supervisor or manager was involved in the conflict was not present at the mediation. It was usually
Mhm.
higher level decision makers. But I'm curious, from your perspective, where do you, in terms of the management spectrum, where do you tend to see some of the problem behaviors emanate? I mean, does it run the gamut from the C-suite all the way down to the lowest level supervisor, or does it tend to sort of hover in that middle management area? What's been your experience?
Well, for sure at all levels, right? But I'm a big believer in this concept that leadership starts at the top, right? And that leadership starts in terms of how a company paints its mission and its values, and whether that actually means something in terms of how it interfaces with this public customer or client, and most importantly, how it interfaces with its internal client, who are the employees and the people who are in the front lines. And so you ask the question, like, where do I normally see the problems in the cases that I mediate? They're all over the place. But generally, if there's an opportunity to peel the onion back and really take a look at what is driving this particular problem or issue that brings us to mediation, a lot of times, even if it's the individual manager or supervisor that we're focused on, if you trace it, it kind of goes to the top in many
Yeah.
instances, right? And the reason I say that, because oftentimes individual managers or supervisors will feel empowered to be who they are, and perhaps not the best managers or supervisors, if they're working in an environment and in a culture that doesn't hold them accountable to the mission and the values, and to making sure that they're good managers and supervisors and observing not only the law, but just the basic principles of how we treat people and how we engage people. If you have strong leadership at the top, if you have a culture where an environment where the leadership has said, we not only have these mission and vision statements on the walls, and as when you open up your computer, you see it flash across your computer, but we live our values. And when when individuals do things that are inconsistent with our values, then we hold them accountable for that. And so I think the biggest difference in kind of what I see some days is, if you see a bad apple somewhere, even if it's way down, it's usually reflective of the bad apple that may be much higher up in the organization, are the bad apples. But if you see a situation where it's sort of a one-off, and that the company or organization took strong steps to correct that behavior, even independent of a lawsuit or being involved in mediation, then that's generally reflective of a much stronger company or organizational culture. And they just find themselves in a situation where, it's a one-off, but you're not going to see them as repeat clients because they take these issues very seriously. So, Dr. Dupree, when you ask the question, or Dr. D, where I see bad behavior all over the place, but I tend to try to say, where does this originate? Where did it start? What's driving it? Is this just a general part of this organizational culture, or is this one person just, a bad apple among many good apples?
That's thank you for sharing that, because I had my perceptions, and certainly with some of the mediations I've dealt with it. It oftentimes isn't at the very top. And yet, I know you've written a book, and I'll come back to that. When I was doing my research for my doctorate degree some, 10, 15 years ago, it was on the psychology of good bosses versus bad bosses. And
Oh, I would love to
yeah,
see that research.
yeah. Well, it's coming.
Okay, okay.
I write about it all the time, but and I'm busy, but it's coming to fruition. But one of the quotes, and I apologize, I don't remember who said it at the time, but I've used it many times in my speaking and my teaching, supervisory management classes, is that the mood of the leader ripples throughout the organization. And so oftentimes my message to leaders is, do a self-check, how are you showing up? And because how you show up, all eyes are always on you. They're always taking a look at, well, where's that leader coming from? And so,
Right,
when you set the tone, you set the framework for how that day is going to go for a lot of people. And
right, right.
and
And
so
how
it,
the others are going to lead as well, right? If they see you kind of, you know, creating a toxic environment, or yelling or screaming, or, calling people out in meetings and so forth, then those below you feel empowered to do that same thing and to lead in that same way. And so you set the tone for your entire organization.
Absolutely, and I oftentimes will say, because I've done a fair amount of family work too, is that it's not much unlike, parents and children. You wonder why your child is misbehaving? Well, what's going on behind closed doors with mom and dad, and
That
so,
is very true.
we learn, we're like sponges, we learn and we emulate that behavior and sometimes throughout our life until we are held accountable for it.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So true.
When you're talking about a mediation and the types of cases, the discrimination, the bullying, wrongful termination, things like that, I'm curious, what do you see as some of the barriers that get in the way of really reaching resolution around whatever the issues people might be bringing to the mediation table?
Right. Well, so I love the title of your podcast, Decoding Conflict or in the Conflict Mindset, because I think that concept is really key in the work that I do, and I'm sure that other mediators and neutrals do, and those that work in this field of conflict management every day. And so in my mediations, the client ultimately is the company or the employer and the employee that hires me or agrees to me for the mediation. But in most cases, I'm retained through the attorneys or the law firms that represent them. So I see my first client as the attorneys that hire me, right, and recommend me to their clients. And I think and I work in the other kind of term of art for the world that I work in is called mediating the litigated case. And in fact, that's of course at Pepperdine Strauss Institute, where many quote starter mediators start out, taking that 40-hour course and, seeing how to translate their experience as litigators into now being mediators and neutrals. And so, so my clients are the litigators who by that term and by the work that they do. They're litigators, they're advocates, they are hired to zealously, as we like to use the phrase, represent their clients in litigated matters and in court. The biggest challenge and barrier that I see, and this I used to be that person as a former litigator, is when for purposes of mediation, litigators do not kind of switch their hats and encourage their clients to approach mediation in a certain place. And what I mean by that, um, they litigators are always on and always advocating, always arguing on behalf of their clients. But what I try to encourage them to do, I say for one day only, or perhaps if it's a multiple day mediation, take off that litigation hat, put on your, act as if you're a mediator or a neutral, or at least that you understand, what the process is all about. And for that one day, take off the, zealous advocate hat and put on the conflict management hat, the conflict resolution hat, and approaching. And the reason I think that's important is because when you come to mediation, it seems so simple. If you don't come with the mindset of saying, we can get this resolved, we would like to get this resolved, we understand that in seeking resolution, there's give and take, there is a need to understand both sides of the equation or all sides of the equation. There's a need to, for one moment, to put yourselves and encourage your client to take themselves out of only looking at things from their perspective to looking at things from the other perspective as well. And without that mindset, many mediations just can result in what I call kind of oral court arguments, as if I'm a judge, that's sitting there going to make a decision on their case, which I'm not. And when I'm mediating, I'm not arbitrating, where I ultimately will make a decision. But as a mediator, I am facilitating, trying to help both sides have a conversation that ultimately gets to resolution. And that means that there will be, strengths to, both sides' arguments. There will be not so great facts about both sides' arguments, but it's about the give and take and the desire to ultimately reach a resolution that helps us to get to resolution. But if we start behind the eight ball, where you don't even believe in this idea of conflict resolution, you really at the heart of heart don't believe that mediation is effective, you think mediators are your enemy and they're just only exist to make your life and your client's life difficult, then
The
we
box, I got to
start
do this.
off with the inability. There's always a question at the beginning of the day. Can we get this done? Mediators by our very nature, we're very positive. We're going to be cheerleaders through the process. But we're not miracle workers, right? So if we're working with people who, at their heart of hearts, really don't believe in the process, really don't believe in the concept of conflict resolution, not that it's impossible to get cases settled and resolved, because we do that every day, the vast majority of the cases, there's that spirit sometimes. But if litigators can start to see themselves as collaborators in the process for one day, not compromising who you are, understanding you're a great advocate, you build that level of confidence in your client. But I think to become more participatory from the place of thought and how you think about mediation, I think leads to much a more gratifying experience. It doesn't make mediation like, oh gosh, I got to go to mediation. I'm not looking forward to this. So it makes for a more gratifying experience. And in my opinion, and in my, 10 plus years of now doing this work, 4 years full time, it leads to a more successful day and more successful outcomes. So that's my biggest piece of advice to litigators is, again, I'm not pointing a finger because I was you for many, many years, but I'm like, take the litigation hat on, put the resolution hat on, collaborate, and be more open to the process of give and take and the spirit of resolution.
Well, thank you so much for going there, Angela, because yeah, it really does. I think that's why I put so much emphasis on the mindset because, how you approach a situation can really influence the outcome. And so as you know, one of the things that I do actively is provide some advanced techniques for lawyers and mediators about keeping the courtroom lingo out of the mediation room, for example.
Mhm.
And again, understand that you're an advocate out there and you are an advocate in here, but again, how you do that advocacy role shifts depending upon the environment that you get. Are you on the steps of the courtroom, or ready to walk, before the bench, or are you literally in a position to be at the table to have a conversation, not a confrontation?
Right. I love that. I love that. And I have to go back and watch some of those videos and hear some of those tools so I can use them as I'm talking to litigators as well.
Yeah, it really makes a huge difference because I know in my mediation experience, not all of mine like yours are represented because I oftentimes will get called in when it's still more of the relationship issue.
Hmm.
And there may be some law aspects around it. Uh, and yet some of my most difficult mediations have not been between my parties being the employee-employer relationship, but the actual legal representatives. They've continued their adversarial role inside what should be an advocacy and collaborative environment. And so
Yeah.
it made me passionate about, okay, we need to shift how we do things here because you're not helping.
Right,
So,
right. And to that point, I'm seeing disappointingly so a lack of civility, more and more a lack of civility among counsel with each other. And
right.
so sometimes in mediations, I feel like I'm mediating the personalities of the attorneys or a conflict that they have with one another and not really focused in on the issues that bring us there with their clients. And so I also want to be an ambassador to talk about, I'm a member of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers, and
Mhm.
our mission as a part of the college is to encourage civility within the profession. And so I would say that the ability to resolve conflict, the
Mhm.
ability to mediate and to settle cases begins with us as lawyers, as advocates, as mediators and neutrals, and how we treat each other, and how and you learned early as a lawyer that you could be a great advocate for your client, but still be courteous and civil to your opposing counsel. That you're focused on the issues and not on personal attacks or division between each other.
Right, right. Yeah, so well put, so well put. And that leads me to your book that you've written, The Workplace Transformed, 7 Crucial Lessons from the Global Pandemic. And so if you could just tease our listeners a little bit on what's one of those lessons that you see as being most profound, most significant as we have rolled out from our pandemic era.
Yes. So I wrote that book about the pandemic, or the stay-at-home orders for March 2020. And I wrote that book a couple of years out from there. And it was like many of us, the pandemic obviously had an impact in so many ways. And I think it forced many of us to really think about our lives, what's important to us, what our priorities are. And as I was having that conversation with myself, about my own personal life, I started to think about it in the context of the workplace as well. And what I didn't want to happen, Dr. D, is that, we will have gone through this, really traumatic set of experiences and years associated with the pandemic, coupled with all the other things that were happening during the pandemic, right? So we won't even talk about that, but lots of cultural and social, issues and so forth. But I didn't want this moment in time, not at least from my perspective, to be documented on how the pandemic impacted the workplace and the tremendous changes it brought about in the workplace, from remote working to learning how to use new technologies to changing the way managers and supervisors now manage. And so it's sort of my love song to the workplace, saying, hey, while we were stopping and breathing personally, let the workplace don't go back to normal. Let's stop. Let's think about what this time meant, what we want the future of the workplace to look like. And so that's my love song and my advice to both employers and employees on what we need to be thinking about as we continue to come out the pandemic, and how we need to think about what the workplace looks like for the future and beyond.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to reflect on those experiences, making sense out of it and putting it into context, because, we were all grappling, trying to make sense of things that didn't make sense. And
Right.
so, and yet we kept on living and we kept on moving forward. And so I really appreciate your emphasis then on moving forward. We can't go back. It's already done. It's much
Yes.
like that mediation, right? We can't go back and change what's already
Right.
happened.
Right.
Instead, we can take a look at what's the impact now and use that to then make choices for how we move forward. And so I love that message that you give to employers, and sing your love song, Angela.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. So where can people find your book?
On Amazon and all online publishers. So just and you can go to my website, angelareddock-wright.com, and learn all about the book, my radio show, and other work that I'm doing in the legal and workplace community.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that you're doing, getting the word out there, because I see the headlines on LinkedIn and all over about you are one active woman in the greater Los Angeles community. And so, again, thank you for all the work that you do, and keep up the great work, okay?
Thank you, Dr. D, and same to you. And thank you for having me on the show. Such a important, this show, your podcast as a whole, is such an important voice in our world of mediation and conflict resolution. I so appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. Well, folks, you've heard it from Angela Reddock-Wright, how to make a difference in your workplace, and all about mindset. And, there's a role for legal advocates, and yet how you show up matters. And so let's make a difference and let's bring resolution rather than confrontation and see where our world will go from here. So thank you again, Angela, for being here. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. Again, Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, founder and host of Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Don't go away. There's more to come. And share and pass this on to your professional community, your legal community, your employees and employers. Thank you again. Well, I hope you found the insights and vision of Angela Reddock-Wright as enjoyable and delightful as I did. It's always a great pleasure to work with her and learn from her in all that she does. And again, her background is so incredible in terms of, the civil rights movement and the impact that had on what she does today. And I know the mediation world is much, much better off with her being an active leader in mediation. Coming up next is Jack Shadle, and Jack is also an employment law mediator, and he comes to us with a different kind of background. He is going to be sharing with us his vision for creating a violence-free workplace. As you might know, in California, SB 553, Workplace Prevention Violence Program, is now required among almost all employers. So don't run away, mark your calendars, come on back and join us in 2 more weeks, because you will hear Jack's insight and understanding about this important new law to strengthen peace in our workplaces. Just so you know, it got started in the hospitals a few years ago, but really pushed forward because of what's going on in our schools. So join me again in 2 weeks, Jack Shadle, Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc.